There are parts of the internet that don't want to be found. They don't show up on Google. There are no links to them on social media. They exist like secret rooms hidden behind closed doors. You can't just stumble upon them. You have to be given the key. Years ago, as a researcher trying to understand the underbelly of cybercrime, I was given one of those keys. The address was nulled.io, and when I first logged in, it felt like stepping into a different reality. I had heard whispers about it, but seeing it was something else entirely. My mission was to understand the enemy, because what I saw inside wasn't just a website, it was the engine that powered a global economy of digital theft. It was a criminal superstore where your entire digital life was sold for less than a cup of coffee. An empire of stolen secrets. And I learned that at the center of it all wasn't some shadowy organization. It was a young man from Germany. A kid, really. His name was Locust Zahn. This is the story of the marketplace I witnessed, the Kingpin who ran it, and the international manhunt that brought it all crashing down. The first thing that shocked me about Nulled was how normal and casual it all looked. It was just a forum, but the discussions were surreal. I saw posts where someone would ask completely openly, "Does anyone have credit card information for sale?" as if they were asking for a used textbook. And the market for subscriptions was enormous. A yearly Netflix or Spotify plan that cost hundreds of dollars, they were selling it for 20, maybe 30 bucks. A lifetime subscriptions to a learning platform like Udemy for the price of a single course. It was a thriving open-air market for stolen access, but that was just the surface level. When I started digging into the deeper sections, that's when the true danger of the site became clear. It wasn't just about saving money on a subscription, it was about tools for mass destruction of people's digital lives. I saw aisles of malware, keyloggers that could record every password you type, ransomware that could lock up a hospital's entire network, and most chillingly, remote access Trojans, rats, that could give a hacker a live feed from your webcam without you ever knowing. But the real currency, the livelihood of the site, was data. Huge databases stolen from big companies, LinkedIn, Dropbox, Adobe, you name it, were sold in bulk. They were called combo list. A list of million emails and passwords could be sold for next to nothing. This was the engine of Nulled. It turned old forgotten data breaches into fresh devastating hacks every single day. And this is where Nulled was different. It was what made it so successful and so dangerous. They had a system of middlemen. These were trusted high reputation users who would act as an escrow service. The buyer would send the money to the middleman, and the seller would send the stolen data. The middleman would verify the data was legitimate, and only then would they release the money to the seller and the data to the buyer. They took a small cut, a few % of their services. It was a bizarre, formalized code of honor among thieves. This system made transactions safe for criminals. It professionalized the entire operation. It's why Nulled grew into an empire, and presiding over all of it was an administrator known only by his username Black. When you spend the time in these communities, you start to recognize the name that hold power. And on Nulled, the name that was whispered with a mix of fear and respect was Black. For a long time, nobody knew who he was. He was just one of the 3 chief administrators, the management. We now know he was Locust Zahn. To understand the man who became black, we have to go back to a quiet town in Germany. While we don't know every detail of his childhood, we can piece together a profile. Sources suggest Lucas grew up in a normal middle-class family. His parents weren't tech moguls. They had regular jobs. Financially, they were comfortable, but not wealthy. They saw a son who was quiet, intensely smart, and spent all of his free time on the computer. From a young age, it was clear Lucas had a gift. He wasn't just playing games, he was deconstructing them, learning to code, exploring systems, and finding flaws. In school, he was likely seen as an introvert. While other kids were outside, his world was the limitless expanse of the internet, and in that world, he found something he couldn't find anywhere else: control, respect, and power. His parents likely just thought he had a hobby, a passion. What they couldn't have known was that in the solitude of his bedroom, their son wasn't just playing on the computer. He was laying the foundation for a criminal empire. What makes someone like Lucas Zahn turn to this life? I don't believe the primary motivation was money. Not at first. It was about the challenge. It was about building something. In the real world, he might have felt overlooked, but online, as black, he was somebody. He was the architect of a platform used by millions. He solved complex server problems, managed a team of moderators, and commanded respect from people all over the world. He and his partners ran Nulled like a Fortune 500 company. They had a system, and with that position came an almost unimaginable amount of power for a man in his early 20s. Think about the irony. The administrator of site dedicated to trafficking passwords had the password of every single one of his criminal customers. He held the keys to the entire kingdom. He felt untouchable. But as someone who understands how these systems work, I knew that no one is ever truly a ghost. Every system has a flaw, and Lucas Zahn made one critical mistake. It was all the FBI would need. For the FBI Cyber Division, Nulled wasn't just another website, it was a menace. A Hydra-headed monster fueling countless ransomware attacks, identity thefts, and financial crimes across the United States. Taking it down became a top priority. The investigation was codenamed Operation in Our Sights. For years, agents tried to penetrate Nulled's defense. It was a fortress. The servers were in Moldova, a small country in Eastern Europe nestled between Romania and Ukraine. The administrators were ghosts using VPNs, and every transaction was cloaked in cybercurrency. It was a jurisdictional nightmare, but here's where the genius of the platform was also its greatest weakness. To make the site reliable and professional, the administrators had to use some legitimate real-world services. They used Cloudflare for protection against attacks. That was the first threat. The FBI served a subpoena. Cloudflare, being a US company, had to comply. They handed over records. They weren't home runs, just a small clue. IP addresses, mostly anonymized, but some logs showed brief moments where a VPN might have dropped. Suddenly, the investigators had a thread to pull. An IP address here, a payment record there. It's a painstaking process, like putting together a million-piece puzzle. They started to build a digital profile of the administrator known as Black. From my perspective as a researcher, this was the moment I knew it was over for him. It's the classic mistake. For months, Black is disciplined. He only uses a secure VPN, but one day, for just 5 seconds, his connection drops, and in that tiny window, his real German IP address is locked, connecting to the Nulled backend. It was the needle in a haystack. Now, I talked about this exact scenario in my video on VPNs. We trust these services to route our traffic to make us anonymous, but at the end of the day, a VPN is just someone else's computer. A brief software glitch, a server reset, a sophisticated attack on the VPN company itself, and your real identity is exposed. It proves a point I've been making for years. Knowledge is more important than tools. A VPN or an antivirus won't save you if you don't understand the fundamental principles of security. And for Locust Zone, that 5-second mistake was fatal. That single IP address was traced to a residence. The FBI now had a potential name. They started building a case. They discovered he had used a personal email to register a domain that was indirectly linked to Nulled's infrastructure. Mistake number 2. They found payment records for servers made from financial accounts that, after digging through layers of shell companies, could be traced back to him. The net was closing, and it was closing fast. The FBI couldn't just fly to Germany and kick down the door. This required a massive international coordination. They presented their evidence to a German police. For months, the two agencies worked in the shadows, sharing intelligence, building an ironclad case. The German authorities began their own surveillance. They had him. All that was left was to spring the trap. The trap was sprung. German police, acting on the joint FBI investigation, raided Locust Zone's home and arrested him. The Kingpin was in custody, but the website, the engine of the crime, was still running. For 4 months, the digital world was oblivious. The untouchable marketplace was taken. 1 minute it was there, this bustling criminal city, and the next, gone. Replaced by a Caesar notice from the Department of Justice and the FBI. The shockwave through the cybercrime community was seismic. During the raid, Locust was reportedly in complete shock. In his mind, he was black, an anonymous entity. He couldn't comprehend how they had found him. His parents were there. Imagine their confusion, their horror, as a team of armed police stormed their home to arrest their quiet, intelligent son for being one of the world's most wanted cyber criminals. Locust Zone was extradited to the United States to face justice. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 24 months in federal prison. But here's the brilliant final move. In seizing the servers, the FBI didn't just shut down the store. They got the customer list. They now had the usernames, IP addresses, and private messages of millions of criminals who had used the website. The hunters became the hunted. The very people who had built their lives on buying and selling stolen data now had their own data in the hands of the FBI. It was poetic justice. The ghost was finally caught. Locust Zone was sentenced. The Nulled marketplace is a ghost town. A victory, right? Yes, but not the end of the story. For every Nulled they taken down, new marketplaces spring up. In fact, a read-only copy of the original Nulled still exists on the dark web today. A digital museum of crime, where old posts and ideas are still studied. The ghost is still in the machine. So what does this story, the story I witnessed from the inside, means for you? It means the single most important thing protecting you is not your antivirus, it's your password. I personally haven't used an antivirus or daily VPN in years. Why? Because I know the knowledge is the ultimate security tool. The entire Nulled economy was built on one human weakness. We reuse passwords. My own data from the Adobe breach was probably on there somewhere, but it didn't matter. Why? Because I practice what I preach. For websites I don't care about, a free trial for a learning app, a random forum, I use a simple template password. It doesn't matter if it gets breached. But for the accounts that matter, my email, my banking, my primary social media, I use a password that is over 40 characters long. It's a completely random string of uppercase letters, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. It doesn't contain any words. It's unguessable and unbreakable. That's real security, not a piece of software, but a strategy. Practice password segregation. Use simple throwaway passwords for unimportant sites. Use a long, complex, unique password for everything else. A password manager is the best tool for this. Enable two-factor authentication everywhere. This is your force field. It's what stops a password leak from becoming a life disaster. Check haveibeenpwned.com website. Go to this site right now. See where your email has been exposed and change those passwords immediately. The story of Nulled is a cautionary tale from the front line of the digital war. It shows how fragile our digital lives can be and how a few keystrokes on the other side of the world can cause devastating real-world harm. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Were you aware of how this criminal economy works? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this documentary informative, subscribing is the best way to support this kind of deep dive content. Thank you for taking the time to understand this story. Stay safe, stay secure, and I'll see you in the next one.